No humming furnace, no glowing wires, no blanket of fiberglass tucked in the walls. Out here, winter doesn't whisper. It comes screaming across the plains like a runaway train. The nights give you one choice: stay warm or die trying. By sundown, the sky's gone black, the air's turned to glass, and the mercury has dropped so low it can freeze your breath in midair. 30 below, and still falling. Wind slipping through log walls like a thief's hand in your pocket. The sound of it never stops, a low moan that turns sharp when it hits the eaves. The smell of frozen pine drifts in through unseen cracks, mixing with the faint scent of wood smoke. One mistake, a fire that burns out too soon, a chimney choked with ice, a night spent thinking you were ready, and by morning the cabin is a coffin. To last till dawn, a family needed more than luck. They needed a fire that would breathe through the night, walls that could trap heat like a bear in a snare, and ways to keep the children alive when the cold came hunting for them. The ones who survived, they knew things the rest of us don't. They could take a frozen shack and turn it into a warm fortress. So how did they do it? What were the fires that could burn 12 hours straight without a single spark of electricity? How did they build insulation with nothing but what the land gave them, and make it work as well as any modern home? And when all else failed, what were the last-ditch measures that kept a family from becoming another story frozen into the prairie? Tonight, we step into that fight for survival. These are the secrets that carried frontier families through the blackest, coldest nights in American history. The winter of 1880 to 1881 didn't just test the frontier, it broke it. In Montana, the Dakotas, and deep into the plains, the cold came early and stayed late. Snow fell so heavy it swallowed fences and barns whole. Winds tore across the land like a whip, and the air was sharp enough to cut skin. For weeks on end, the thermometer sat at 50 degrees below zero. No thaw, no mercy. The land itself seemed to close in. Horses froze standing where they were tied. Cattle huddled against fence lines, steam rising from their nostrils until it turned to frost. Wells froze solid. Even the sound of an axe striking wood carried differently, duller, heavier, as if the cold swallowed the noise before it could echo. Men who had survived 10 winters before found themselves staring down a season unlike anything they'd ever faced. Every trick they knew, every habit, every routine, suddenly wasn't enough. Out here, survival didn't hinge on the whole winter. It hinged on a handful of hours just before the sun slid away. The decisions made then meant the difference between seeing spring or being buried under it. A lone rider, caught out in that kind of night, might see the lights of his cabin just half a mile away and still never make it. In that cold, half a mile could be forever. And once in a while, a blizzard came in so fast, the snow erased the horizon entirely. People stepped outside for wood and never found their way back. That's the kind of winter this was. These weren't just ways to stay warm. They were rules for living and dying in a land where the cold didn't forgive a single mistake. The fire is the only thing between you and the cold. It's not just heat. It's life itself. Through the frosted glass of the cabin window, a deep orange glow pushes back the dark. Inside, James Calder, a rancher hardened by 30 years on the plains, leans over a stone hearth, sliding another split log into the firebox. Outside, the wind screams at 25 below. Inside, his wife Eleanor tucks their 2 boys under quilts, each bed lined with stones wrapped in wool. That fire's been alive 6 hours already, and will burn for 6 more. Not because of chance, because it was built to. On the frontier, you didn't just have a fire. You engineered it. to burn long, burn steady, and burn safe inside walls that trapped its heat. Frontier fireplaces weren't the small, polite hearths you see in paintings. They were massive, deep enough to swallow 4-foot logs whole. The firebox was cut with angled sides, forcing the heat forward into the room instead of letting it vanish up the chimney. The back wall leaned inward, bouncing the warmth out like a reflector. Above it all, a damper in the chimney gave you control, just enough air to keep the burn clean and hot. Not so much that the fuel vanished before the night was done. Stone was the frontier's secret weapon. The hearth itself was a battery, soaking up the fire's heat and releasing it for hours after the flames died. Some families extended that stonework out into the room, turning the very walls into heat sinks that could keep the air warm till morning. Wood wasn't just gathered. It was selected like fine tools: oak, hickory, maple. Each chosen because it burned hot, made dense coals, and lasted through the night. Logs were cut in the spring, split into exact sizes, and left to dry in the wind and sun for half a year. By winter, seasoned wood was light in the hand, cracked at the ends, and hollow-sounding when struck. A good fire was loaded in layers, large logs at the back, smaller splits up front. The coals from the big pieces kept the heat steady, while the smaller wood could boost the temperature on demand. Underneath it all sat the coal bed, glowing embers that could wake a fire from slumber, with nothing more than fresh air and kindling. At night, the fire was banked, packed tight with hardwood, the damper drawn down, the coals covered in ash to slow their burn. Done right, there'd be enough life in the hearth come morning to start the day's first fire in minutes. Some families didn't have that luxury. When a hearth collapsed in the Benson cabin one January night, they survived by moving every pot, pan, and iron tool into the coals, heating them until they glowed, then spreading them through the room to keep the air just above freezing until morning. It wasn't comfort, but it was survival. Others improvised with clay stoves in the center of the room, built hastily with mud from beneath the snow, burning whatever scraps they had left. Anything that made heat was fair game. Stones heated during the day were carried to beds and corners, slowly releasing warmth into the night air. The same fire that kept the cabin alive also cooked every meal, soups bubbling in iron pots, bread baking in side ovens built into the hearth, and always a bucket of water nearby, a clean chimney, an escape plan in case the fire turned from friend to enemy. 'Cause out here, a winter house fire didn't just take the home, it took the people in it. Sarah Calder runs her hand along the inside wall of the cabin. It's warm. Not hot, but warm. And out here, that means everything. Beyond those logs, the night is 30 degrees below zero. The wind howls over drifts taller than a man, but inside, the air holds steady. The cold kept at bay by a hidden defense built right into the walls. Frontier insulation wasn't an afterthought. It was an art born of necessity, perfected by trial and error. The settlers built their walls in like 2 layers, an inner and an outer skin of logs, leaving a gap wide enough to fill with whatever the land could spare. That hollow space was more than a void. It was a lifeline. Moss was the favorite, thick, soft, and stubborn against the cold. Gathered in the heat of summer, dried under the sun, packed tight until every gap was smothered. The right kind of moss held thousands of tiny air pockets, trapping heat the way a sponge holds water. Mixed in with it, animal hair, saved from butchered livestock, even human hair from haircuts, sometimes down feathers from ducks and geese, light and warm as a winter coat. Between the logs, a frontier mason's secret: chinking. Clay or mud mixed with straw or hair packed in tight to lock out the wind. Not just stuffed into cracks, but layered and smoothed until the wall became a shield. Even the floor got its armor. A crawl space beneath the planks was stuffed with dried leaves, straw, or bedding from the animals. In some homes, chickens were kept down there, their body heat rising up through the floorboards in the dead of night. Windows and doors were the weak spots. At sundown, heavy blankets or animal hides were hung over the glass, and strips of leather lined the frames to seal out the drafts. Some families built 2 doors with a small space between, a trap for the cold, before it reached the room where the family slept. The roof was no less important. Thick with sod and layers of bark, moss, and leaves, it kept the heat from slipping into the sky. Every layer was placed with care, bottom to top, until the home was not just a cabin, but a thermal bunker. Some settlers learned these tricks from the Lakota and Cree, who knew how to use cattail fluff and dried reeds to make walls that breathed in summer but sealed in winter. Others borrowed from Scandinavian immigrants, who carried centuries-old knowledge of how to survive a season where the sun barely rose. Maintenance was constant. Cracks sealed before they grew. Fresh moss packed in at the first sign of a draft. The smallest breach could drop the temperature enough to freeze water overnight. This was the frontier's silent partner in survival. Not the blaze in the hearth, but the still, steady walls holding the warmth close, while the wind outside clawed for a way in. Night on the prairie could feel endless. The fire kept the room alive, but the bed kept you alive. The Calder boys sleep side by side, buried under quilts and fur throws, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. Around them, stones wrapped in wool radiate the heat they soaked up from the fire hours ago. The air outside is so cold it could kill a man in minutes. But here, under the blankets, the cold has no way in. On the frontier, managing your own body heat was just as important as heating the cabin. The settlers knew how to trap it, share it, and guard it like treasure. Clothing was the first line of defense. Not one layer, many. Linen or wool against the skin, then shirt, vest, and heavy outer garments. Wool was the king of them all. It held heat even when damp. Every thread spun and woven by hand. Every garment the result of months of work. A single winter coat might represent half a year's labor, but it could mean the difference between coming home or being found in the snow come morning. Then came the heated stones, the frontier's version of a furnace you could carry. Pulled from the heart of the fire, wrapped in thick blankets and slipped under the covers, they gave off a slow, steady heat that lasted deep into the night. Bricks or iron tools served the same purpose when stone wasn't at hand. Beds themselves were built for survival. Thick mattresses stuffed with straw or feathers lifted you off the cold floor. Curtains or heavy quilts hung around the frame could trap the warmth of your own breath, and no one slept alone if they could help it. Families pressed together, parents in the middle, children nestled against them, turning body heat into a shared lifeline. Before sleep, hot food or drink fueled the body from within. Soup, tea, milk warmed over the fire. The heat from digestion was another weapon against the cold. And if that wasn't enough, there was always movement. Squat, stretch, stamp your feet until your blood ran hot again. Even under the covers, a wiggle of toes or a flex of fingers could keep frostbite away. Some settlers even learned to breathe warmth into the space beneath their blankets, a pocket of heated air to keep their hands alive a little longer. In the winter of '79, the McAllister family lost their fire to a chimney collapse in the middle of the night. They survived until dawn with nothing but body heat. Parents and 4 children wrapped in every scrap of cloth they owned. And when the cold won around, when fingers stiffened and skin went pale, there were rules. skin to skin, slow rewarming, and never, ever shocking the body with too much heat too fast. Out here, your body was the best heater you'd ever have. But only if you knew how to use it. The wind is howling when James Calder wakes. Something's wrong. The fire is dead. The room is silent except for the sound of his youngest boy's teeth chattering like distant gunfire. Outside, it's 40 below. Inside, the cold is moving fast. He's got maybe half an hour before the chill takes hold for good. This is where the frontier's emergency rules come into play. Not suggestions, not ideas, rules, practiced until they became muscle memory. Because out here, you didn't get a second chance. First, fire. Every cabin worth its salt had tinder and kindling ready to go in more than one place. Birch bark peeled in summer, pine pitch sealed in tins, dry moss, char cloth, anything that could catch a spark when nothing else would. These weren't scattered supplies. They were lifelines, kept dry, kept close, and kept ready. Second, heat the people, not the room. If a child's lips turned blue, you stripped away the damp clothes and pressed them skin to skin with the warmest body in the cabin. Then you wrapped them in furs and blankets, trapping every bit of heat you could find. If firewood was gone, you burned what you had. Broken furniture, tools, even the walls if you had to. A cabin could be rebuilt, a family couldn't. When the cold came hard, families pulled tight into a formation. Strongest adults outside, the old and the young in the middle, turning themselves into one big human furnace. Food was part of the fight too. Fat, honey, even a swig of whiskey for its quick burn, high-calorie fuel to stoke the body from within. If the cold kept winning, you made the battleground smaller. Blankets and hides draped to form a tent around the fireplace, cutting the space you had to heat. You fought to save the core, not the edges. And all the while you watched for the signs, shivering, slurred words, clumsy hands. If someone slipped toward unconsciousness, you moved fast, slow rewarming, warm drinks, careful monitoring. Out here, even the cure could kill if you weren't careful. Some cabins kept a small brazier or an iron pan that could burn scraps or charcoal inside. Others heated metal tools, wrapping them in cloth to warm hands and feet. Neighbors, when they could be reached, had their own signals. A column of black smoke, a flash from a mirror, 3 sharp gunshots into the air. If they saw it, they came. No questions asked. Everyone knew the clock. At 40 below, an unheated cabin could turn deadly in less than 3 hours. Without a heat source, a human body was living on borrowed time, so the Calders moved with precision. Fire lit in minutes, stones back in the bed, children pressed close. The cold still pressed at the walls, but they'd bought themselves another night. Because on the frontier, you never fought to be comfortable. You fought to see the sunrise. Winter on the frontier wasn't just cold. It was a living thing. It crept through the cracks, clawed at the walls, and waited for the moment you slipped. The families who made it through, they didn't do it with luck. They did it with knowledge, with preparation, with a kind of stubborn grit that doesn't melt when the frost sets in. They built fires that breathed through the night, walls that trapped the heat like a vault, beds that held life as close as a heartbeat. And when it all fell apart, they had a plan and the will to carry it out. Today, we've got thermostats and power lines and men who drive trucks full of fuel through the snow. But when those fail, it's the old ways that still work. Out here, in the quiet between the wind gusts, you can almost hear it. The heartbeat of a cabin that's holding its own against the storm. And maybe that's the lesson the frontier still whispers. The cold doesn't care who you are. But if you're ready for it, you can still win.